Thank you so much. So we are going to have amazing cases, video-based cases in this IC. So we have Dr. Priya Narang, who is going to talk about potpourri of cases of subluxated bags and dislocated IOLs. Then we have Dr. Harshul Talk, who is going to talk about small pupil, not a challenge anymore. Dr. Shail Vasavda, who is going to talk about toric IOL in PCR, and myself, I'm going to talk about one complex cataract and glaucoma case. So over to you, Dr. Harshul. I think no one needs Dr. Harshul's introduction. He is an amazing surgeon. I think an all-rounder, plays badminton, rides cycle, and I think we all are very thankful to him for introducing us to the world of ophthalmology. We sailed through the lockdown because of that, I guess. Thank you so much. Over to
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sheetal, for your kind introduction and for having me in your course. It's a wonderful course which we have been doing for many years. So I'll be speaking on small pupil phacoemulsification. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So as we all know that, can you see my video now?
Yes.
Okay. So as we all know that managing a small pupil has always been challenging for any phacosurgeon, but with the development and invention of this Milligan ring, we all know that our life has become very easy. So this Milligan ring is made of polypropylene and it has 4 scrolls. It comes in 2 sizes, 6.25 and 7 millimeters. So this is a routine size which we use. So it comes with in this injector. So you just engage the leading scroll to the iris margin, and the lateral scrolls engages most of the time. And the trailing scroll you can manipulate with the Kugelens hook. So once this ring is in place, you know that you're going to get a perfect 6.25 millimeter pupil, which is not going to come down during the surgery. And your phacoemulsification becomes just like any routine cataract case. Now, another advantage is that this ring, it lies at the pupillary plane, at the iris plane, so that there's no tenting of the iris as it happens in the case if you use iris hooks. And of course, you don't need to make any further additional paracentesis to implant this ring, as we need to make 4 or 5 paracentesis for iris hooks. So you implant your IOL and take off this ring, and you can either use injector to take this out or just invert this Kugelens hook and take one of the scroll and pull it out, and it comes out easily. So there's another case in which you can see that the leading scroll and one of the lateral scroll is engaged, but the side scroll is not engaged to the pupillary margin. So you can go from side port and engage this third scroll. And see, you need to use many times 2 instruments to disengage this. It may get stuck there. So always keep anything handy so that you can just disengage. And then you can put OVD again and just engage all the 4 scrolls. This is another case. So I use 1.8 millimeter incision, but this is the old video when the ring was only used to go through 2.2 millimeter incision or 2.4 millimeter. So what I was using to reuse it is this cartridge, which comes with the microol lens. So you can see this goes through 2 millimeter incision. So I'm putting this ring in this cartridge with HPMC and using to inject it through this cartridge, and see how easily it goes, just like the original injector in which it comes. So we ETO this ring and reuse it. So the leading scroll engages, and lateral scroll, you just need to guide them a little bit with the Kugelens hook to engage, and most of the time it usually engages the lateral scrolls. And then you can engage the last scroll. So after this, for last 1 year, the newer version of this ring has come, which is what is called as a 2.0 version. This 2.0 version is a thinner profile of the malignant ring. There's another case in which pseudoexfoliation was there. So CTR ring was implanted after finishing the phaco. So what I want to show you is the 2.0 version. So it has, it's a newer, smaller gauge material, and there is increased scroll gap there so that it engages the pupillae margin much easier. So this video was sent by Dr. Boris himself. And now we are routinely using this 2.0 version only. So you see it has a thinner profile, goes through 2 millimeter incision, and scrolls have more width. So it engages the iris margin easily. So once you have engaged the pupillae margins, it's easy to complete your phaco. How much time is left, Dr. Sheetal? Yes. Do we have some more time?
Can the
yeah, I think there's still 5 minutes to go.
Okay, okay,
timer
perfect.
Is there, yeah.
Perfect. So I'll also like to show the use of iris hooks as we have time, and many times we need to use iris hooks. If you don't have this malignant ring available and you realize that you need to use it. So there are two ways. Either you can, the best way is to, what has been described is you always try to put one iris hook near the incision, main incision or sub-incision. So these are small paracenteses which we make. Try to make paracenteses, not in the clear cornea, but towards the scleral side, so that there is less of the iris stenting there. So you put the iris hooks one by one. So I always put two hooks almost 90 degrees to the main incision, and this is the one sub-incisional paracentesis which I made, and one iris hook just opposite to the main incision. So you have a diamond configuration once you stretch all the four iris hooks. So it gives the maximum visibility in the direction in which you are doing phacoemulsification. So just tighten these iris hooks one by one and just tighten, stretch them so that you get a rhexis of 5.25 or 5.5 millimeter. Don't overstretch the iris, this pupillary margins, as it may tear the sphincters and may lead to permanent mydriasis. So here, so once these hooks are placed, so of course you need additional paracentesis, and sometimes you may do under topical, but it's preferable if you put a block here. But malignant ring we routinely do under topical anesthesia and intracameral lignocaine. So see, the only problem is that the iris always remain tented up. And so once you complete the phaco, you do irrigation aspiration and the hydroimplantation, which I do routinely. So here goes the IOL in the capsular bag. And there are two ways. Either you can hold the hook near the limbus and release this silicone stop which is there. What I like to do is I just push it inside. You see, I'm just pushing it inside so that it gets, please turn it sideways and take it out. So I found that this way the iris tends to get distorted. Yeah, so I'm just pushing it inside, releasing it, release all the hooks and just take it out. So one by one, you take these iris hooks out, take all the OVD out, and it finishes the case. So I think with the availability of these devices, now we also have more choices available Dr. Suven has come up with beautiful Bhattacharjee ring, B-Hex ring, which is also like very useful. You are using that ring also regularly. And we have another Oasis expander and different kind of expanded devices. But whatever device you are comfortable with, it's always better to use these devices whenever you see a pupil like the small pupil, because nowadays we have all the IOLs, multifocal, toric, or all IOLs which require perfect sizing of capsular axis. So we can do phaco through 3mm pupil also, but we can't be perfect about the sizing. We can't view it properly if we can't view it properly. So it's always better to have good pupillary dilatation and do a safe phaco surgery. Thank you very much, Dr. Sheetal, for giving this opportunity.
You're muted. You're muted, Dr. Sheetal.
No, she was not muted actually. Her voice was not coming.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, yes. Now it's coming. Okay. Yes.
So what I was asking is, do you have any tips for reducing the sphincter damage in cases of 4 hooks which we use?
Yeah, that's what you should always try to retract the iris so that you get a 5.5mm, rhexis. Don't overstretch it, like that you stretch the iris till the limbus. So that is not required really. You just need, if you are able to create a rhexis of 5.5mm, so you just need a 6mm, 6.25mm view. That's it.
That's an excellent tip. Thank you so much, Dr. Harshul. I think the next is Dr. Priya there. Okay, so I think next we can take Dr. Shail's case because Dr. Priya is going to join us in some time. Dr. Shail Vasavda, I think we don't need any introduction for him. The name is enough for him. He's a junior most powerful Vasavdas / cataract gurus of our country. So over to you, Shail.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheetal, for that kind introduction. And it's a wonderful course that you've been conducting. I have, unfortunately, a series of several such cases which I wish I never had. But unfortunately, many of us will be facing it from time to time, that irrespective of just because it's a toric IOL plant doesn't mean you cannot have an intraoperative complication. So this is a second eye of a 53-year-old male. Absolutely nothing in it. The LenSx with toric IOL was being planned, grade 2 cataract, and there's nothing in the eye or in the planning that would have made us think otherwise. The placement axis was also along the lines of the incision. The femtosecond had done a good job, done a nice capsular axis. Lens division was also assisted by the femtosecond. And we are going ahead smoothly with lens division using moderate parameters. So things are happening quite slowly because of these lower parameters, but they usually tend to happen under our control. So we find it quite safe to work with these lower parameters of around 20 cc flow rate and bottle height ranging from 30 to 50 depending on the eye or the compliance of the globe. So everything has gone off well, nice centered capsular axis, and now time for IOL implantation. It was a T3 IOL 20 diopter and it's been injected in the normal way, but notice just one thing here. The plunger is actually overriding on the IOL. So generally you would want the plunger to be at the optic haptic junction, but it's overriding the IOL. And therefore we are facing a little bit of resistance in trying to, inject it. And there it came out with a jerk. So let's review that again. The IOL is being nicely pushed. The plunger is on top and therefore that jerk. Generally nothing happens and everything goes, and that's what we felt, that nothing would have happened. But to our horror, we have injected a toric IOL in the bag and we have created this nice up to the equator posterior capsule rent. Now this is a tricky situation because not only is this a single piece IOL in the bag, it is also a toric IOL. So whatever we do with it, if we have to leave it in the bag, it has to be stable. You can't leave it just like that. The safest would be to explant it and put a 3-piece IOL in the sulcus. But having had a few such cases in the past, we decided to use the option of reverse capturing it. which means you let the haptics remain in the bag, but you pop out the optic in front of the anterior capsule. It is quite time consuming, because by the time you pop out one, the other can tilt, because there's a lot of cohesive viscoelastic inside the eye at this point of time. But finally, we are managing to make sure that the optic comes up, and this is how the capture would generally look. You will have a very broad, so this indicates the optic is in front, but you will have a very broad base at the optic haptic junction, unlike a three-piece capture or a conventional capture where the optic is pushed down. So we could manage to reverse capture. And of course, you have to make sure that during all of these maneuvers, no vitreous has prolapsed through the area of the posterior capsule rupture. Fortunately, it wasn't. The IOL was placed on its axis like we had shown previously at 168 degrees. The Varian overlay is not shown in the recording here. And make sure that you don't withdraw your irrigation before hydrating all the wounds. This is the patient at the end of surgery, nice reverse optic captured IOL, toric in its place. And fortunately, if the capture has occurred well, it will remain like this. So this is the patient 3 months, no problems at all. And this is the patient stable, the reverse capture very stable. Of course, this patient is likely to have more inflammation post-op, more chances of IOP post-op. So typically we would give mannitol post-operatively immediately once the patient goes in the room, and probably topical IOP lowering medications with maybe an increased frequency of topical steroids for a few days. Now coming from the anterior to the from the posterior to the anterior part. So again, another innocuous looking cataract. You can notice here the surgeon is focused more on the posterior capsule. So the focusing is not correct. You should be focused. You should be able to see the anterior capsule margin correctly, but everything has gone off well so far. A soft cataract, so 4 quadrants were done, but you can see that most of it is almost in a single piece. So the actual 4 divisions weren't completely done. But in soft cataracts, you can get away with this because the material is not very dense. So even if it's a large fragment, it generally doesn't cause any damage to the posterior capsule. If this was a very hard lunescent cataract, we would caution not only for damage to the endothelium, but tumbling of these fragments can cause PCR as well. But having removed most of the fragments, I've started to see something behind these fragments. So notice here that the anterior capsule has given way, and this probably would have occurred during this large fragment removal with the probe going somewhere there. And with the ozzil or with the sideways cutting tips, it's very easy to catch the capsule and cut away. So the first thing that you want to do is, once again, make sure that the chamber doesn't collapse. And here you need dispersive viscoelastic, not cohesive, because cohesive will easily come out. So dispersive viscoelastic to form the chamber, and then bring out the phaco probe. Use low parameters in this situation. So I've reduced my flow rate to 16 cc from 20 cc. So that I don't inadvertently catch anything in the fornix except for the cortical material. And we could remove the cortex safely without making sure that this capsular tear doesn't extend to the equator. Now the tricky situation is you have a half open anterior capsule. If it was a non-toric, the decision is not very difficult, because you go ahead and place a single piece in the bag. If you have 3/4 of the cover, it should be okay. But being a toric, you want to make sure that this doesn't rotate post-operatively. And of course, when things go wrong, they always go wrong. So this patient, the placement axis was exactly in the area of the anterior capsule split. Here, I would definitely suggest injecting under viscoelastic, because it will allow you a lot of time to manipulate the IOL, and it will open very slowly. So we make sure that slowly we nudge the IOL into the capsular bag without causing too much of turbulence or disturbance. And then we rotate the IOL in its desired placement axis before removing the viscoelastic. Here, you don't necessarily need to go behind the IOL because there's already an open area. So the viscoelastic will pop out from there. And this is the patient at the end of surgery. We thought the IOL is stable, and the best would be to check post-operatively. And this is the patient at 2 months. Some amount of fibrosis has occurred, but the IOL is very stable. So our experience has been that even in these anterior capsule splits, if the rest of the things are managed well, you can definitely consider toric IOL in the bag in such situations. This is a posterior polar young patient, not experienced presbyopia. So we had explained to him that we might consider a multifocal toric if we are able to preserve the support. And we prefer femtodelineation in such situations where no hydrodelineation needs to be performed, and the lens is divided into 3 cylindrical ring zones. So we are removing each zone from the support or the cushion of the other. So until the last point, the posterior polar part remains protected. And after the central nucleus is removed, while removing the epinucleus, you don't completely remove it. So you just detach it. So now it creates a communication between the anterior and the posterior segment. So some amount of fluid will trickle back. And therefore, now even if you do a hydrodissection, this capsule will not rupture. And fortunately, following all of these principles, we were able to preserve the posterior capsule until the end, and the case seems to be tackled for now, and we are now started scrubbing and preparing for the next case. But sometimes you get over and above yourself, and this was one such case where overconfidence took over, and I thought, let me just polish this plaque since I'm doing a multifocal toric. But as they say, never touch the posterior capsule of a posterior polar, and from what was an uneventful surgery, it's now converted into an eventful procedure. So now you have this nice oval tear where everything had gone off perfectly. Now is the time not to panic. Once again, do not withdraw your instruments. And having a past experience of pediatric cataract surgery, I think one thing we have found useful is that if you can convert a posterior capsular rhexis, tear into a posterior capsular rhexis and give it strong margins, you can still consider in the bag IOL implantation. So that is what I'm slowly but surely trying to do. And you need to make sure that you convert it from both sides. So one, I've done it, I'm almost completing it from this side, but that's not enough. We need to convert it from the other side as well. So you go ahead and convert it from the other side so that both sides, the margin becomes rounded and it's not a sharp pointed margin, because whenever it's not converted into a strong margin, there are very high chances that the moment you inject IOL, it can split and rupture further. So since we have a strong anterior and posterior capsular rhexis margin, we went ahead with our plan of in the bag multifocal toric IOL in this patient. Once again, stability was not something that we were overtly concerned about. Make sure in the end that there is no vitreous disturbance by injecting triamcinolone. And this is the patient at the end of surgery, and this is the patient 3 months post-operatively with a very stable multifocal toric IOL. So I think I have 1 or 2 more cases, but I think we can stop here for discussion.
Very nice videos, Dr. Shell. So I think Dr. Shell, reverse optic capture, even though it's really difficult with single piece IOL, but I think one more trick is not to overinflate anterior chamber while you are trying to do it, because that time again it can go in capsular bag. So how is your experience like after say a week or 2? Have you seen any case in which the toric, it has again gone back in the capsular bag?
No, we haven't. So first of all, before I answer, acknowledgements to Dr. Priya Narang and her publication on reverse optic capture in JCRS 3-4 years back, I think. So we've had experience with 4 toric IOLs where we have done a reverse capture, 2 in cases of PCR and 2 for negative dysphotopsia in the other eye. So reverse optic capture has also been suggested as a treatment for negative dysphotopsia. So we had 2 patients who were extremely unhappy with negative dysphotopsia in one eye. So in the second eye, they had toric, but we wanted to prevent negative dysphotopsia. So in all 4, the most important point is the rhexis size. If the rhexis, anterior capsule rhexis size is larger, then you have to go to plan B. You cannot go ahead. But if the capsular rhexis is small enough and of adequate size, reverse optic capture stays there, no matter if it is a single piece, 3-piece, or a toric or non-toric.
Yeah, and the good thing is that if you have planned toric IOL, of course, you always be careful of the rhexis size. So
correct.
Rhexis size, usually we are always careful in multifocal toric. You have to, because...
Correct.
Yeah, of course, I know Dr. Priya's favorite topic is negative dysphotopsia. She has done a lot of publications, work, and...
Thank you, Dr. Harshal. But as Dr. Shell and as you have been discussing, I do agree that the size of the capsular axis is, it should be optimum. You know, that is what is going to hold the optic back. No doubt we can do it even with a one-piece IOL. It can be done, but then it's a bit tricky. You need to be a bit expert to do that. Doing with a three-piece is comparatively easier. So, yes.
Yeah, so these were all unplanned. I mean, we would definitely not plan a single piece for reverse capture as a primary procedure. That's out of, I mean, that's 100% agreed. Yeah.
Amazing cases, Dr. Shell. So next I call upon Dr. Priya Narang. She also needs no introduction. She is a woman, boss woman of Indian ophthalmology or rather international ophthalmology. And I think we can't thank her enough for introducing us to 4-throw pupilloplasty and making our life so much easier. Over to you, Dr. Priya.
Thank you so much, Sheetal, for having me here and for your kind words and for allowing me to present this potpourri on these subluxated bags and dislocated intraocular lenses. So let us go ahead through this entire scenario. Now, the management in these cases, you know, these are always challenging cases, and the management, it always depends upon the degree of the subluxation of the capsular bag that you have, and then it is you decide upon what kind of procedure you want to go ahead, what are the other intracapsular devices that you are going to use, and how you're going to manage this case. So every case in itself is a challenge that presents to you, and you need to optimize your surgery and to give good results to your patients in the postoperative period. So what I would just like to show you is, you know, I'll start from lower to higher. We go one step higher in every complication that comes up. So this is a case, you know, you have a subluxation, you're doing a surgery, you're trying to do a capsulorhexis and all. Now, actually what happens is when you have a big subluxations or a coloboma, you have an anterior-posterior communication. That is the communication of the posterior chamber with the anterior chamber. Now, as you are seeing here at 12 o'clock position, there is a one quadrant gap which is there because of the subluxation. So we go ahead with the entire thing, but I would just like to put forward one of the techniques. This is the vitrectomy assisted phacoemulsification. This is the technique that was introduced to us by Ashwin. What actually came up with this was that, you know, whenever I just paused this here because whenever we do a phacoemulsification, what happens is that wherever there is an open area around the equator where there is an anterior posterior communication, when you do a phacoemulsification, the fluid tends to go behind. And what happens in these cases is, you know, there's a continuous vitreous hydration, and continuous vitreous hydration keeps on pushing and it makes the entire thing, the entire lens and the entire complex to bulge. So it often makes the surgery challenging. So what actually is advised in these cases is, you know, we try to place a trocar, a retinal trocar, and we try to do a vitrectomy. Actually, this vitrectomy is not exactly a dry vitrectomy because the vitreous has already been hydrated. So this is a kind of a volvular trocar that is placed, and intermittently, you know, whenever you have that thing entirely coming up into the anterior chamber, you can just pause your surgery, go behind, introduce a vitrectomy probe through the trocar, and then your anterior chamber, it starts, you know, deepening, and you can go ahead with the phacoemulsification procedure. So this is just a combination of a vitrectomy for phacoemulsification procedure. So I'm just trying to show you this. In this case, like, I just pause one more thing, that whenever the vitrectomy, what I'm trying to show you here is in this segment, whenever you're trying to do a vitrectomy in these cases, you know, you have to be very careful that you do not actually rupture the posterior capsule with the vitrectomy probe. You have to introduce and place the trocar in the area where you can exactly visualize the vitrectomy, the tip of the vitrectomy probe from the anterior chamber. So you're going to do it as a blind procedure. The rest of the procedure remains same. This is just one small tip that might come in handy to anybody who is watching this series of videos, that, you know, you can do this as a combination. Life becomes quite simpler at times, you know, by using some of the surgical tips that I'm just trying to put forward right now. So you can see there's a shallowing. Again, vitrectomy is done. You pause the surgery, again, go inside, and again, you do, and you can continue with the procedure. You can place a CTR, and then the procedure is the routine that we do in all the cases. You can take up an intraocular lens. You can use a 3-piece IOL, a 1-piece IOL, whatever the surgeon wants to put it, and you can just end up this surgery. Actually, I try to use 3-piece intraocular lenses, even in these cases, you know, for just very simple, one simple reason that, if these patients, they come up with any other problem in future, without opening up the entire thing, I can refixate this intraocular lens as a glue diode procedure, and I can put this off as a closed chamber surgery. You need to position the haptics. Usually it is better to position it along the area of the subluxation so that, there's these haptics of the intraocular lens. They also try to push the bag, although you have placed a CTR, so does its work. Go ahead with the pupilloplasty procedure. Single bias pupilloplasty is the procedure of choice for me. And that is how you can just wind up. You can keep on doing that procedure till you close up the entire wound that you actually want it to be. I'm just trying to show you this. This is the subluxation of an intraocular lens video. My point of showing this is nothing else, but I just want to put forward that whenever we have to expand these massive subluxations, we try to make this clearer tunnel. So this is the glued marker, which has been introduced again by Ashwin. So this helps you to delineate the flaps, the size of the flaps. You can be bang on to it by using this. Otherwise, you can. It's not necessary actually. If you are an expert, you can just measure it and you can just do it by yourself. So this is the L-shaped incision. I'll just try to pause this video out here. An L-shaped incision is a closed incision for big scleral wounds that you need to expand the dislocated intraocular lenses. So this is actually a 3 millimeter by 3 millimeter, but you also have a 3 millimeter extension. It's a volular extension which is there inside, which helps to do this procedure. So this is how you start making up the incision. This incision, the advantage with this incision is that, it is considered to be astigmatically neutral. It is not something new that I am presenting. Actually, this has been documented quite before. In late 70s, it has been documented, but it has actually not been adopted. I don't know why, but this works beautifully. You try and create a tunnel in this fashion, and then you also extend it internally, a 6 millimeter internal tunnel you have in this case. And then you have a comparatively bigger tunnel, which is about valvular. You can even go ahead and make, suppose if you are using a smile, a frown incision or a smile incision, whatever you are comfortable with, you can do that. But I just wanted to highlight this. You can convert this surgery into a glue diode surgery and making up of the flaps and then going ahead. Now you see how beautifully this incision is being extended. When you extend this incision, you can just see that, this entire intraocular lens, it tries to come out in toto in this procedure. So these are just the collages, which were made for the peer review that I have put it up because it's a stepwise approach. And then, you just expand this, the iris hooks, the pupil is expanded. And what you see here is the Sommering ring, which is associated with an intraocular lens. The Sommering ring just tries to flip off and come off. It's an after cataract, which is usually present in some of the complicated cases. And you can then just grasp this and you can just expand this. Now you just see this comes out as in toto. And this works really beautifully in massively dislocated intraocular lenses. The rest of the procedure is a glue diode procedure, which I think everybody is very well versed with. You just do this, put up a fixation, and you can use a 3-piece intraocular, and then you can just do a pupilloplasty procedure and it ends up over. We go further with this. This is one more advanced stage of a subluxation of the intraocular lens. Now, what you see in this case actually is that, you have a 3-piece intraocular lens, you have a dislocated lens because the bag is also dislocated, you have a Sommering rings which is there, and you also have a posterior rupture out there. The bag is not intact. There is a posterior capsular opening associated with this. So you try to do this as a closed chamber procedure, try to clean up or remove all the tractions which are there, even behind the capsular bag. And once you have done this, you have to cut down the capsular adhesions. When you try to cut off these capsular adhesions, you have to be very careful. And you also need to use a vitrectomy probe side by side because, before you pull out anything from the eye, because there is a vitreous all around it, you need to cut off all the tensions which are the extension of the vitreous and the strands which are there present. And then you need to just manipulate this and you need to try to clean this over absolutely. Now, the advantage that you have in this case was that this is a 3-piece intraocular lens. So we go ahead with cleaning up of this intraocular lens totally, and then doing a glue diode procedure. These are the iris hooks. This is the iris hook stopper that we use this. If we do not have an iris hook stopper, we can also use the IV tubing. You can just cut it down into small pieces, and then you can use this, because otherwise you might have to open up the entire iris hook pack. So this can be used, prevents the slippage of the haptic inside the eye, and it can be beautifully used in the glued procedure if you actually do not have good assistants with you who are helping you around. And then you can just clear off this, all the adhesions that are there around. I always use a fluid infusion inside the eye when we do these kind of procedures. So you just clean up everything, put a glue, and then you seal it off and it's gone. I take this one step again ahead because I think I have less time, but let me show you. This is a very important case that I want to show. In this case, what you are actually seeing is that, you have this endocapsular segment out here. This is again a subluxated bag. In this case, there is also a segment inside the eye, but it was not supported. And this is the reason, why this bag is further subluxated out here. This video I have presented in the ASGRS Challenging Case Symposium. This has an endocapsular ring. It has an endocapsular segment. There is a 3-piece intraocular lens also in this bag. Actually, what probably happened in this case was that the suture of the endocapsular segment has gone off. So probably this has come off anteriorly and it no more supports the capsular bag. And when you are doing an intervention in these cases, at times these massively subluxated bags might also have an IOL drop. I'll just take 1 minute and I'll just wind this up. So you can just see that this is the endocapsular segment which now comes off. And this is the suture with which it was probably tied up. So you remove this suture and then you expand this endocapsular segment outside the eye from the corneal incision. Having done that, you need to further intervene, go ahead, lift the intraocular lens, bring it up. You clear up the entire fibrotic material, the capsular bag, which is encompassing the ring and the endocapsular segment. For adequate visualization, you need to put up the iris hooks. I'm just forwarding this video. Now you see an endocapsular ring, you also see the haptic. So you need to disentangle this, pull the haptic, catch the tip, and then externalize it, Otherwise, if you do not disentangle this, if you try to pull off the endocapsular ring, it will pull on the haptic of the IR also. Now this is this is the silicone tire of the iris hook that we have started using. It works very well, brilliant, it's cost effective. As I said before, you can also use an IV set, cut it, and then you can use that plastic material out here. It's always sterile. So this is how, this is the, what I showed in the previous video, it's one step ahead of that. And then you just do a vitrectomy, remove the endocapsular, this ring. You should be very careful. It should come out in toto and it should not break. You have any adhesions, use the vitrectomy probe to clean this all around. So having cleaned this all around and externalized the haptics, catching the tip and then tucking up the haptics, then it is the same as the glued IOL procedure. So I think this is what I wanted to highlight, that, whenever you have the subluxations of the bag, of the IOL, you need to be very careful and you need to choose your method of fixing up the things accordingly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priya, for such a wonderful potpourri of cases. Do we have any questions for Dr. Priya?
I think I just had one question for her. Outstanding. I mean, there's nothing that can be done better than this. I just had one question, that in cases of coloboma, I have that sort of fear that because the patient generally also has retinal coloboma, they are used to seeing through that pupillary zone, because that part of their macula is or the retina is usually functioning. So by closing it with a pupilloplasty and changing the pupil aperture to a little bit more superiorly, are we likely to cause more visual disability than improvement? That was my only.
I think that's a very good question, Shell. And yeah, I mean, like, suppose if the patient also has a retinal problem, or because see, many a times it's not only the lens coloboma or the iris coloboma. There is often an associated posterior coloboma also. Correct. So yes, we need to keep that in mind also. Yeah, I do agree. I don't have anything to defend on that, but yes.
No, I mean, this is the only. Sometimes I sort of I feel in double mind whether should we do or should we not.
Actually, there have been a lot of cases where people have found that there's no difference in visual acuity or perception of visual acuity by patient if you do or don't do pupilloplasty in such cases. So I think it's more for the cosmetic purpose if someone wants to do it, but it is really not going to add too much to the vision per se.
Yeah, unless and until it depends. Like suppose if it's a located coloboma, yes, it won't make much difference. Right. Many a times it's superior, it gets covered by the eyelid. Then again, it's not going to make any difference. But yes, cosmetically, yes.
And do you also find that many of the I've not as much experience as you with the intrascleral fixation of IOLs, but the only 2-3 times that I've tried to refixate the same 3-piece IOL which was implanted many years ago is that I always found that the memory is so lost that just a little bit of manipulation and they sort of have given up on that and always explant and replace it with a new.
That's a brilliant thing, Shell. Even I do explantation of even if it's a 3-piece IOL, I explant it many times. Like specifically if those kids have undergone surgery at a very younger age. Many times, I have had massive dislocation cases being referred. And as you said, yes, I have found in 2 or 3 cases, when you explant that intraocular lens, the haptic positioning and the haptic curvature and everything has been changed. So that does happen. Refixations can be done only when you are seeing absolutely everything clearly that, okay, fine, the haptics are good. But many times, when you get those complicated cases where you're not in a position to assess the dimensions and of the haptic, I would suggest it is better to explant, use a new intraocular lens, and then do it. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very nice videos, Dr. Priya, as usual. We have witnessed her live surgery many times. Wonderful surgeon she is. So, you, Dr. Priya, I'd like to ask if you need to use a suture for scleral fixation. Now, many people have shifted to Gore-Tex. So, have you started using Gore-Tex or still like me are using?
I was searching for Gore-Tex and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful to Dr. Vasavda, sir. He gave me sutures of Gore-Tex. So, I'm using that till now. Okay. I'm yet to buy for myself, but yes, I'm using that.
So I know I need to contact Dr. Shell for that. Huh?
Yes.
Gore-Tex actually is now available even in India. You do get Gore-Tex because a lot of this dentists.
Yeah, it's available, but I think there is a problem of availability. Of course, cardiovascular surgeons are regularly using Gore-Tex.
You have to get that entire packet of that, and it's a bulk.
The problem is that it comes in a box of 50.
Yeah, and it's very costly unless and until you have a terrific practice like Dr. Vasavda, sir. No, if you have to, you want those 1 or 2 sutures, it becomes difficult, for getting the entire pack. It's costly.
Or we can make a Gore-Tex user club, no? So that we can...
We can do that. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. We can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Priya, for such wonderful cases. So I think I'll start with my case now. Sorry. Is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see, Dr. Sheetal.
Okay. So I work as cataract, cornea and refractive consultant at Retina Foundation, Ahmedabad. So I'm going to present a case which I've done a few years back about managing a traumatic subluxated cataract, glaucoma and mydriasis. I have no financial interest. So this was a 32-year-old patient, had history of trauma on road traffic accident. When he presented, he had this corneal edema. On staining, he had epithelial defect also, and his pressure was very high. So basically, for acute management, we gave him topical steroids, anti-glaucoma drops, but there was a corneal opacity after healing, and which did not reduce after 2 to 3 months. So we did PTK for him. After PTK, 3 months, we took him for the case. For the surgical intervention. So as you can see that this the pupil was there was no dilating drops used. The pupil was big. There was a huge mydriasis, and the epithelium was still irregular, which we had to remove it for better visualization as well as a better healing later on. Now you can see that there is a subluxation of the cataract from around 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. So we go ahead with the case. As this was a glaucoma case and the patient was not compliant with the medicines, as well as his glaucoma was not controlled. So we decided to go ahead with a trabeculectomy. With one tip I want to give for the trabeculectomy is whenever we are putting this MMC soaked balls, you count it while putting it and count back again while removing it, because if by mistake if this MMC soaked ball remains, it can cause scleral necrosis and ischemia. So once this was done, after a thorough wash and this partial thickness scleral flap, we move ahead for the cataract surgery. I generally prefer a temporal incision. Here it is even better because superiorly my trabeculectomy is there. So we start with this side ports and main port. Once that was done, sorry, I'll just forward it a bit. Once that was done, the rhexis was started. Now it is very important to have a good rhexis, especially in a subluxated case, because there is no way you can put the lens in sulcus. So if your rhexis goes out, you have to just do some kind of SFIOL or SFIOL, I think. That's the only choice we will have it. This particular patient had a little bit of difficulty in rhexis, but we could manage it. Again, I prefer doing hydrodelineation in any traumatic cases, any subluxated cases where there is zonular weakness, so that while doing a case, there is no further strain on the zonules. Now, this was a very soft cataract in my hand. Such cases I do generally by irrigation and aspiration. So we finished off the lens aspiration with irrigation and aspiration. And because of the subluxation, I put the CTR ring. Now, one tip I want to give while putting the CTR ring is when we come to the end, always do the two instruments so that you ensure that the CTR goes inside the bag. Otherwise, it can sometimes go into the sulcus. Then the 3-piece lens is my choice for such cases was put, and the haptic was oriented in the subluxated area. After this case, now the biggest thing was what to do for the pupil. At that point in time, I thought, although I would do something different now, but at that point in time, I thought that I want to give this patient a nice round pupil. So I decided to go ahead with the purse-string pupilloplasty. Now, any case of pupilloplasty, what you need to do first is try and kind of release the synechiae. That will help to form the angles little better. Also, you get some kind of iris tissue, especially in this patient, the iris was just not visible. So I will get some kind of an iris tissue for me to actually hold and put my needles through. So after pulling the iris 360 degree, we have some kind of now iris rim to play with. In this purse-string pupilloplasty, what we use is, we use the one double-armed 10-0 Prolene suture. So when the 10-0 double-arm Prolene suture is there, it comes generally with a straight needle, or at least what we have in our hospital are with the straight needle. So I curve it with the needle holder, and from this nasal side port, the side port opposite to me, I introduce the needle and take the bites. Ideally, you should take small bites. This iris was, because of I think the increased intraocular pressure during the acute stage, there was a lot of iris atrophy. Iris was very, very fragile, and iris, for every bite, there was one hole which was forming in the iris. Ultimately, I took few bites and I take out the needle, retrieve this needle with the help of 26 gauge needle from the inferior side port. Now you can notice that iris was coming out continuously because it was so floppy that any movement was causing iris to come out of the incision. So to continue with this pupilloplasty, we have to introduce the same needle which we have retrieved out of the side port through the same side port again and complete this particular quadrant. Now, when we complete this particular quadrant again, the needle comes out through the main port. Now, this side of the pupilloplasty, or the bites, were complete with one side of the needle, which goes from this side port, then comes it out from the inferior side port, and then comes it out from the main port. So with the help of 26 gauge needle, we got it out from the second main port. Now the second arm of the 10-0 Prolene goes from the same side port from where we initially started. That is the side port which is opposite to you, where you are sitting. That is the nasal side port in this case. So you do the similar procedure again. You introduce the needle and you take the bites in all the quadrants, doing the same thing, taking the needle out again and introducing it through the same side port. We complete the 360 degree pupilloplasty. and we get the needle out through the main port. Now we have both the needles out through the main port. Here again, you can see the iris is coming up. I don't know whether if I had used the iris maintainer, maybe it would have been slightly better, although it is little difficult to take iris bites with the continuous flow, I guess. So I did it under the visco, and we gently put the iris back. Now we have two threads which are out of this main wound, and we have to pull it just to make the pupil smaller in size. Now you have to remember that you need a size which is good enough for the patient to not have photophobia or glare. At the same time, because this was a glaucoma patient and he had a trauma, he may have anything with related to retina later on. We have to have enough size where the retina examination can happen, because these pupils generally do not dilate, they are sutured pupils. So once you are happy with the size of the pupil, you give the second and third knot and you cut the thread with the micro scissors. You can notice that because of the atrophic iris, there are so many atrophic patches, and there are 3 or 4 holes which had happened in the iris, which I think I could not avoid doing it. So once we cut this, our pupilloplasty was over. In such cases, sometimes I like to give the suture over the main tunnel, and then we shifted back to the trabeculectomy side. I like the end block dissection for my trabeculectomies with the knife. And we removed a small, around 1.5 to 2 millimeter end block dissection, removal of the trabecular area. At this point in time, after doing the PBI, what I noticed, and I didn't want one more thing in this case, was vitreous started prolapsing from that. Maybe because I cut the iris slightly more posteriorly, and it gave a chance. It gave a kind of formed a channel towards the vitreous cavity. So we did the localized vitrectomy for this particular case. And after that, after localized vitrectomy, the vitreous did not come back again, and we closed the scleral flap with one suture and with 10-0 nylon. And I generally close my conjunctiva also with 10-0 nylon. So this was the case where we did cataract with CTR, we did pupilloplasty, post-string pupilloplasty, and we did the trabeculectomy. So there were too many things were already there, and we added a bit of anterior vitrectomy in this particular case. Now this case later on follow-up looked pretty good. Even those holes were like kind of, had healed pretty well. Patient's photophobia decreased quite a lot, and patient's vision improved. If you see, even his epithelium has healed so much better than before, and his best corrected visual acuity with little bit of refractive error was 6.9. His IOP is also well maintained. You can see a nicely formed bleb in this case. Thank you so much.
Very nice, Dr. Sheetal. It was all in one, I guess, everything you did in this case.
Too many things, but I guess, and Dr. Priya will, she's not there, but she will agree that now if I come across such a case, I would like to do fourth row pupilloplasty.
Can you?
Sorry?
Of course. Hello?
Yeah, because I think I will have lesser bites if I do the fourth row pupilloplasty. So although it may not be so round, the pupil, but I think it's better from the iris handling.
Yeah, it's very easier. It's very much easier to do SFT.
Yes.
And many of these irises are very frail. So by the time you actually tie the suture, they almost sometimes break off.
Yeah, in fact, in this case, we witnessed so many times. I was just taking a bite and there was a big hole which was forming. I was actually wondering whether to stop there and just, be there and maybe later on give a prosthetic contact lens. But what I noticed is patient was pretty young. Prosthetic contact lenses, many patients after a few years become very, very intolerant. So I thought that let me give continue with the thing. But after I saw it, after a few months, it healed pretty well actually. Even those holes and all, it heals by fibrosis, although it always it still gives a bit of photophobia because iris is so thin.
Yeah, and one more thing, I use a 30 gauge needle for SFT, so that we have a very thin pass through the iris. 26 gauge needle, and through 30 gauge
26 gauge was only used to retrieve the tenoproline needle. Yeah.
Yes. For that only you need to, for SFT, you need to pass it through iris also to retrieve it.
Right.
So for that, 30 gauge needle gives a very thin bite in. And these iris, of course, as you showed that the patient who had chronic these, glaucoma, or their iris are very friable, very atrophic kind of. So it's always better to have a thinner holes in iris.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask one question to Shell actually. Do you have, because I've tried this optic capture and I'm very, very bad in that. Do you have any tips for the beginners for that? Because invariably I cannot just put my optic through that, the size of the posterior capsule is smaller than the size of the optic, and I just cannot push it behind.
So I think first thing, like Dr. Priya correctly mentioned, is that optic capture is best designed for a 3-piece design IOL and not a single piece. Second is sizing of the rhexis is generally quite important. So if you have a good sized anterior capsulorhexis, you can use that as a guide for your posterior capsulorhexis. So like we use the iris as a guide when we do the anterior capsulorhexis, that we want to be so much far away from the iris to keep a safe distance. Similarly, when we do the posterior capsulorhexis, I think it's important that we use the anterior capsulorhexis as a guide. So you don't want to, of course, be larger than your anterior capsulorhexis. You want to be smaller, but not too small. Sometimes because we fear that this will run away, we end up making it too small. And if it is too small, it will cause too much of stretching and tilting. So I would say there's about a millimeter inside your anterior capsulorhexis margin should be a safe posterior capsulorhexis size.
Also, what I noticed, what I noticed in your case is you were kind of folding the edge of the optic, because that was a single piece IOL which you were using. So I think that's easier to put. But when we use the 3-piece IOL, I think it's not that easy. The 3-piece optic, even though it is accurate, doesn't kind of fold the way your IQ will do.
So the reverse capture is completely different. But the conventional capture, the two things that I find useful is, first, make sure that the haptics and the IOL is completely inside in the bag, and then just try and tilt the IOL one side. First, finish one half, and only once you finish one half, then you go to the other half. So keep, say for example, this is the pupil, keep this one half, first finish one half capture and then the other half capture. That generally tends to help and work.
And the other thing is, in your second case, I think, where the rhexis had run away, and I think you put the toric IOL. I think we all are so concerned about having a good rhexis, especially when we are putting toric IOL. Or sometimes even in myopic cases, we try to put CTR so that decentration, rotation should not happen. So why in your case, even though there was a runaway rhexis, it did not rotate?
I think the three factors. One is that for the 3/4 of the rhexis is intact and the posterior capsule is intact. So rest of the optic is nicely covered by the capsulorhexis margin. And I think with no financial interest, but in such cases, the long-term stability of the IOL material and the IOL platform really matters. So in a standard average eye axial length, it may not matter in most of the cases, but I think in such special situations, high myopes, compromised capsules, children, these are the cases where we need an IOL platform which has a long time tested stability. And we fortunately have publications both for the adult and pediatric age group with PCCC also, where the rotational stability of this IOL has been comparable with open capsule and without open capsule. So I think choosing the correct platform is also crucial in such cases.
Also, do you think a CTR would help in your case? Like I put it in myopic.
So there are pros and cons. For and against CTRs as a general in myopia, big bag, so on and so forth. To be honest, literature, there is no evidence or support to say which one is right or wrong, and we've not found any difference in our adult IOL stability publication way back a decade ago. We subclassified based on the axial length as well, and we did not find any difference in the rotation with the axial, myopes also. Of course, the subset is smaller the extreme axial myope. So as a rule, we do not do anything different for a high myope or a big bag compared to what we would do otherwise.
Your experience, Dr. Harshul, do you put CTR when you're doing toric IOLs in high myopes? Or do you find any difference?
No. I also didn't find any difference. Like, I found that the patients who are high myope, they had any rotation. I feel the tackiness of these IOLs is so good that they adhere tightly to capsular bag. You know, that helps in the accuracy of IQ, especially, which whose tackiness, this lens tackiness is best. So I feel that's the reason.
Okay, that's
so I don't put CTR in these high myopes or any cases like this.
That's a great
Shell, I just wanted to know, I want to ask one question, Shell.
Yeah.
There is recently a case which has been published, where the toric IOL was rotating and then an inverted Sioni ring was put to stabilize the, to prevent re-rotation of toric IOL. Do you have any experience of using?
No, we've never. I haven't honestly read this case also, and no, we haven't had any such instance, or not tried doing any such thing. If it's a subluxated cataract, generally, even if there is astigmatism and if we are able to fix the bag with Gore-Tex and double Sioni, we generally never put a toric IOL, because not only we need horizontal stability, but sometimes there is also anterior-posterior is not always correct, however much your measurements may be accurate, because that limbus is very difficult to define. So we generally don't use toric IOLs when the bag is fixated with sutured rings or anything like that.
Okay, that's a good one. I think very nice cases, good discussion. Do we have any other questions for any of the presenters? I guess because we don't have Dr. Sheetal Brar with us for her case, we can conclude this session before time. And thank you so much again, Dr. Harshul, Dr. Shell, and Dr. Priya for participating in this video-based IC. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for conducting such a wonderful course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheetal.
Thank you so much.